equality of opportunity is possible. That's a possible goal. And at least we could advance that. At least we could do something to, just to change the course of who knows how many people's lives. And we don't do a fucking thing about it.
I mean, we're looking at each other because we just had lunch before we came. It's like the precise conversation that we had. I told you this is a motherfucker that gets it.
Oh, I know.
It just makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me, and it's not a subject of any presidential debates. It's not a subject of anybody who's running for Congress or running for Senate. We have to fix this. This is a problem that's been going on for decades and decades, back through Jim Crow, back all the way to slavery, the same communities, and we don't do anything?
Pull that a little closer.
Redlining, everything.
Pull that mic up a little bit.
Yeah, just that's good.
That's good?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, it's wild. It really is wild. And, and the race part of it is a major factor. It's a major factor. And it's a factor that gets ignored when people start talking about racism, systemic racism in the country. Talk about sentencing. How come that's not talked about?
Yeah, well, that's a vestige of...
Have you ever gotten undressed only to realize you were in front of an open window? How did that make you feel? Exposed? Vulnerable? Well, going online without using ExpressVPN is like being naked in front of a floor-to-ceiling window. That's because your internet provider can see and record everything you do online. Your internet provider like AT&T or Verizon can see every website you visit, and they're legally allowed to sell your browsing activity to third parties without your consent. But it's not just internet providers. If you're using Wi-Fi at work, at a hotel, Airbnb, or even at home, the owners of that Wi-Fi can also see everything you're up to. Imagine all those people getting a list of everything you've ever clicked on. Kind of worse than being naked in front of a window, isn't it? That's why when I go online, I like ExpressVPN running in the background. Guys have been saying this for years. I've talked about ExpressVPN on my show and even on my buddy Tim Dillon show. If you use the internet in any shape or form, you need to start using ExpressVPN. The app is so easy to use. You just tap on one button and all of my traffic gets sent through a secure encrypted server. ExpressVPN is like tinted windows on my internet connection. I can see out, but no one can see in. So make sure you secure your online activity today with the VPN that I trust to keep me private. Visit expressvpn.com/Rogan today. That's expressvpn.com/ROGAN. And you can get an extra 3 months free. expressvpn.com/Rogan. Tap the banner or visit this episode's page to learn more. This episode is brought to you by AG1. The supplement industry has gone crazy. And with so many powders and pills and vitamins, it's hard to know what's what. I get asked all the time what I would take if I could only take one supplement, and the answer is hands down AG1. AG1 is a daily foundational nutrition supplement that supports whole body health. It's a science-driven mix that replaces all those multivitamins and probiotics with one simple drink. It's not some whole regimen that's overwhelming or confusing, just a scoop in a glass of cold water every day and you're set. It couldn't be easier to start feeling better. I drink AG1 every day because it's a way to get the nutrition I need that my body can absorb and use effectively. I know you're going to love the way it makes you feel. Order now and you'll get a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting AG vitamin D3 and K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase at drinkag1.com/Rogan. Start building your health foundation first with AG1.
That's a vestige of slavery, segregation,
Jim Crow, redlining, everything.
Exercising your right to a jury trial, being punished twice.
It's hard to know where to pick up because we just had this conversation. But look, well, let's preface the episode by saying this: we are doing something about it. I keep telling you that this forum, it keeps paying dividends. We are making progress. We are opening people's minds. I'm getting letters from prosecutors. I'm getting letters from sheriffs. I got a letter from a sheriff in Oregon last week, and he sent me a badge and said, "I want to show you how committed I am to trying to make change happen." And it was from this show. So we're doing it. We're addressing it. We're making it happen. Why politicians don't? What drives someone to want to get into politics these days is for a different psychiatrist. I have no clue what the allure is, but there's such a swirl of ego and power struggle and divided loyalties. I can't even wrap my head around it, but we're doing it. We're helping. We got to do it grain of sand by grain of sand until we have a sandcastle. So that's what we're doing. So I do think we're making a difference. But it's crazy because Sheldon and I are the same exact age, and we didn't know that until we were on our way down.
Born days apart.
Yep. And he flew when we flew down. It was the first time he'd ever been on an airplane.
Wow. What was that like? Fucking weird, right?
Nah, I actually loved it. I was very excited. I'm kind of like an adrenaline. I like the adrenaline rush, just the speed of it, and just the whole idea of just. I had this analogy in my head when I was up in the clouds, and I'm looking down, and I said to myself, I just came from the bowels of hell, spending 25 years in prison, and now I'm in the sky above the clouds in the heavens, headed to a destination to talk about change and to talk about all of the things that brought me to this place today, and the conditions in which I grew up, and how social conditions play a role in the decisions that we make, or the lack of achievements or opportunities, like Joe just said a couple of minutes ago. Those opportunities are very important, and being able to start that line where everybody is not necessarily equitable, but everybody has that same opportunity.
You have a chance.
You have a chance.
Yeah,
a real chance.
Well, so tell us about your upbringing.
So I'm a coda. My mother's deaf. My father's deaf. My sister's deaf. My aunt is deaf. I grew up in a deaf household.
What's a coda?
A coda is a child of deaf adults.
That's crazy. This is the second podcast in a row I'm doing with someone who's like that.
Yeah.
Moshe Kasher, who was on yesterday, his parents are deaf. He signs, and you know, he had to translate for his mother his whole life.
Same with me. So as a child growing up, my mother's also white. My grandmother came to America in 1918 from a boat from Sicily. My father is Nigerian. He's African. So there was always this contrast where, I wasn't really sure where I belonged at. Kids are cruel. So growing up, kids would say, oh, you're a mulatto, you're a half-breed, and oh, you're adopted. And for a long time, I kind of suffered as a child with an identity crisis, not really knowing where I fell at on either side, what my identity was, who I was supposed to be. And my father, I'm also a product of intergenerational incarceration. My father was incarcerated when I was young at an early age. He did about 15 years. I was incarcerated. My grandfather was incarcerated. My great-grandfather was a slave. And my son killed somebody when he was 12 years old. So that there's this cycle of incarceration based on the conditions, the social conditions, and where I come from. I grew up in New York City, Harlem, on the borderline between the east side and the west side on Fifth Avenue. You hit Fifth Avenue, you're like, oh, wow, you live in a nice place. Okay. Crack era Harlem, 80s, 90s. And I grew up, protecting my mother, interpreting for my mother. My mother could hardly ever keep a job because of her handicap. There was always somebody that would replace her. A lot of people saw my mother as a victim. She was a white woman on 112th Street in Lenox Avenue, an all-black community. So as a child, I grew up protecting my mother. So I feel like in hindsight, I didn't really have an opportunity to be a child. I had to grow up and be a man early in my life in order to be able to protect my mother. And a lot of people didn't even know that I could hear. So there were times where I would be standing there with my mother, and like people would just be making all type of random comments and just disrespectful, just hateful stuff. And I would sit there as a kid, just kind of like looking up, like, dude, I can like hear you. I think my life took a significant turn. And when I was in the 5th grade, I was always pretty smart, but as being smart and growing up in these neighborhoods, the school systems are not really equipped to handle the number of children that's coming through. So you had one teacher and like 30 kids. And me just being who I was always pretty smart. And when I was finished with my work, I would kind of just clown around. I had this teacher in the 5th grade, my math teacher, and what he would do was when you acted out in the classroom, he would call you to the front of the classroom. He had a stack of rulers. Today he would be arrested. Back then it was permissible. It was considered as just punishing kids and he would call you to the front of the classroom. He would make you stick out your hand. And he would put salt. He had a big salt shaker that he kept on his desk. And he would sprinkle salt in your palm. And he would smack the ruler into your hand. And the salt would kind of embed itself into your palm. And would kind of have like a little burning sensation. So one day I decided that I was tired of it. And he called me to the front of the classroom. And I put my hand out. And when he swung, I moved my hand. And he almost fell over. He chased me around the classroom. I ran out into the hallway. He chased me into the hallway. I grabbed the fire extinguisher off the wall and I sprayed him until he fell.
That was my reaction too. I was like, he
was cursing. And oh, man. But long story short, I sat in the back of the police car for 3 hours as they determined my fate as a 10-year-old. Put me in handcuffs and everything. And I had a counselor at that time. And I guess she convinced them to send me to a hospital. So they sent me to Mount Sinai Hospital, psychiatric unit. And I remember them sticking me with a needle. Thorazine. 10-year-old kid, man. Just
Jesus Christ.
In a straitjacket, being escorted to a hospital. They stick me with a needle. And so for months from Mount Sinai, I went to Metropolitan, and I attempted to escape from Metropolitan, and they sent me to a more secure area.
What's Metropolitan?
Metropolitan Hospital. It's also a psych ward.
Why did they send you to a psych ward for that?
I guess they I was considered as a young black kid who's out of control with behavioral issues, and I'm not sure exactly the gist of the conversation that took place, but from what I've gathered now in the future is that my mother felt that she would rather see me in the hospital than to see me in the jail, because it was either that or they told her that they were going to send me to Spofford. So I went through that, just being subject to just a whole bunch of different medications: Mellaril, Haldol, lithium, Cochitin, and then they transferred me to Pleasantville. From Pleasantville, I went to Hawthorne, and and I'm gonna be honest, this is where I learned how to become a criminal, because prior to that, I was just a kid. They put me in this place where I was around older kids, and these kids were really like about that life. There was really bad stuff happening. If you look up Hawthorne Cedar Knolls, to this day, it's been closed for allegations of sex trafficking and child abuse.
Just so, because we know it because we're from New York, but those are juvenile detention
They're like group
facilities.
homes. Yeah, they're like juvenile detention facilities. So they consider me as a person, they put what they call a pin on you, and it's a person of interest, a person in need of assistance. And they put you in these places, and they just kind of just leave you there. So I finally got out of there. I went through a lot there. I was molested by a counselor, and I finally escaped from there. And I just went back into the streets at 13 years old. And I just was fending for myself. I was out in the
So
streets.
it was 3 years of that?
3 years of that.
For one instance where a guy's trying to hit you with a fucking ruler.
Yes.
Wow.
And, I always look back and I see that as a trajectory in my life that just changed everything. I went from, it changed me as a person. I lost my innocence. I felt like after I left that place, I was a darker person because of the things that I saw and the things that I went through. So I come back and we're talking about, this is 1988, crack era Harlem. You know, you got kids 13, 14 years old making $1,000 every 2-3 days. Selling drugs, looking out on the corners. This was like real stuff. You see New Jack City. New Jack City was for real back
The
then.
people who grew up after that do not understand pre-crack and post-crack.
Oh, yeah, big
it
difference.
Was wild.
Devastated my community.
It was wild. And how the fuck did that happen? Like, how the fuck did that happen? When you go through the whole story of it,
All
and
right,
you go
now
through,
we're
like, I mean, come on, man. Like, I had Freeway Ricky Ross on here twice.
There you go. I ain't
We
gotta
just
say it.
last
He
night.
said it.
So last night we were talking about this, and we were talking about like, what do we want to accomplish today? And last night when we were talking, he's like, well, you know, the CIA brought crack into. I said, you might want to stay away from that, but here we are.
The fuck out of staying away from that, man. My friend Michael Rupert, rest in peace, he was the guy who stood in front of the city council on television and exposed it. He was a former Los Angeles narcotics officer. And he said, I personally witnessed the CIA selling drugs in the inner cities of Los Angeles. And that was the Freeway Ricky Ross situation where they were using that money to fund the Contras versus the Sandinistas in Nicaragua.
It's really not it's crazy because last night Sheldon's telling me about it, and I spent a long night into the early morning hours reading some of what you told me to read. It's really not in dispute that it happened.
Not in dispute at all.
And what I'm going to let Sheldon tell. What blew me away about it was that not only was it known how addictive it was also known how easy it was to reproduce the process.
And how much cheaper it became.
Yeah. Not only that, the differences in sentencing.
The difference is in
That's
1 to 5.
the wildest thing.
1 to 5 is like a
1 to 5 ratio.
Yeah.
And then you had the the Rockefeller drug laws that came into effect that required mandatory minimums and et cetera, et cetera. So when we talk about social conditions and we talk about situations that were created for the purpose of what? You know, you separated families. You had mothers and really grandmothers who had to take care of the children because the mothers were in the streets smoking crack and the fathers were either in the streets using drugs, selling drugs, or in prison with astronomical sentences and removed from the family structure in totality because of these conditions. So now you have the child just kind of left to fend for itself. And we're not even talking about the children who were born that were subject to mothers who, the crack baby, right?
Yeah.
And that's just, I mean, the list just goes on and on when we talk about social conditions and we talk about the long-term effects of these conditions and how it produces behavior. Like Ivan Pavlov, one of my favorite psychologists, he talks about stimulus and a response, right? A classical condition. And so you introduce the stimulus and then you have a response, which equals to the condition that we see.
And you're also talking about what we were talking about earlier. You're still dealing with these communities that are still suffering from segregation, Jim Crow, and then they throw crack in it, like just gasoline on a fire.
Yeah. It's crazy because we've had this conversation in the abstract. We've had this conversation, about this very subject. And then the more I got to know Sheldon and his story, I said, well, here was someone that not only lived it, and I want to make clear, one thing that has always struck me about Sheldon is his vulnerability, but also his honesty. He's like, I'll be the first to tell you out of the gate, I did it.